1 minute ago, Keir Starmer has just faced a brutal no-confidence vote that could end his political career tonight. The Labour Party is tearing itself apart right now, and it all started with one leaked document that has MPs calling Starmer a traitor to Brexit voters. Here's what actually happened and why this matters for every British voter. Make sure you subscribe because this story is moving fast, and I'll keep you updated on every twist. 27 Labour MPs signed a motion of no confidence against their own leader today. That's not normal politics, that's a political execution. The trigger? Starmer's team has been quietly negotiating closer ties with the EU behind closed doors. We're talking about potential changes to fishing rights, trade rules and judicial oversight that could affect Brexit agreements. But here's where it gets messy. These weren't secret surrender deals like some headlines claim. They were exploratory talks about economic cooperation that happen between governments all the time. So why the rage? Because Starmer promised Brexit voters he wouldn't touch their hard-won independence, and to many of his own MPs, even talking to Brussels feels like betrayal. Let me break down exactly how we got here, because this didn't happen overnight. Back in 2019, Labour got destroyed in the general election. They lost seats they'd held for decades on Hartlepool, Blyth, Redcar. All because working-class voters felt the party had abandoned them on Brexit. When Starmer became leader in 2020, he made a clear promise. No more Brexit wars, no more second referendum talk. Labour would respect the result and move on. That promise won him the leadership. It also won back some trust from Brexit voters who felt burned by Jeremy Corbyn's mixed messages. For 3 years, Starmer stuck to this line. Labour stopped talking about rejoining the EU and focused on the cost of living, healthcare and economic growth. It seemed to work. Labour climbed in the polls and won back some of those lost northern seats in local elections. Brexit voters started giving them another chance. But behind closed doors, a different conversation was happening. Senior Labour figures, especially those from London constituencies that voted Remain, never stopped believing Brexit was a mistake. They saw rising costs, trade problems and economic struggles as proof that leaving the EU had failed. These MPs started pushing Starmer to be more realistic about Brexit. They argued that small steps toward closer EU cooperation wouldn't hurt anyone and might actually help the economy. The first sign of trouble came 6 months ago. Labour's Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, gave a speech about pragmatic cooperation with Europe. She talked about mutual recognition of qualifications, easier business travel and shared research programmes. Brexit voters noticed. The language was careful, but the direction was clear. Labour was testing the waters on moving closer to Brussels. Then came the leaked document that changed everything. 3 weeks ago, a 47-page internal strategy paper was leaked to the press. It outlined potential areas where a Labour government might seek closer EU ties. The details were explosive. Fishing rights could be extended through 2035 instead of ending in 2026. European Court of Justice rulings might apply to certain trade disputes. Food standards could align more closely with EU regulations. Student exchange programs could be expanded and environmental policies could be coordinated across borders. None of this technically broke Brexit, but to Brexit voters, it felt like death by 1,000 cuts. The reaction was swift and brutal. In Hartlepool, the Labour constituency party held an emergency meeting. 3/4 of attendees demanded Starmer explain himself. The local MP, who had won the seat back from the Conservatives in 2023, found herself defending policies she hadn't even agreed to. In Grimsby, angry party members confronted their MP outside a town hall meeting. One shouted, "You promised you wouldn't betray us again!" The video went viral on social media within hours. In Sunderland, where Brexit won by 61%, the constituency chair resigned with a public letter calling Starmer another London politician who doesn't understand working people. But the real explosion happened inside Parliament. Labour MPs from Brexit constituencies were furious. They'd spent years rebuilding trust with voters who felt abandoned. Now they faced going back to those same voters and explaining why their party was once again talking about closer ties with Brussels. John Smith, the MP for Stoke-on-Trent North, put it bluntly in a private WhatsApp group. Keir has just handed our seats back to Reform UK on a silver platter. The group chat, later leaked to journalists, revealed the depth of anger among Labour's northern MPs. Messages called Starmer out of touch, naive and worse. Within days, backbench MPs were holding secret meetings, not to plot a coup, they insisted, but to discuss concerns about party direction. Those concerns turned into action when Reform UK's polling numbers started climbing. Nigel Farage, never one to miss an opportunity, held a press conference within 24 hours of the leak. He called it Labour's Brexit betrayal moment and promised that Reform UK would be the true voice of Brexit voters. The numbers backed up his confidence. A YouGov poll showed Reform UK jumping from 12% to 15% nationally in 1 week. In Brexit voting constituencies, their support rose even higher. 22% in former Labour heartlands. Conservative MPs watched with barely concealed glee. After months of their own internal battles over economic policy and leadership questions, Labour's crisis was a gift. Rishi Sunak's allies immediately started working on attack ads. Labour, or you can't trust them on Brexit, was already being tested in focus groups before the no confidence vote was even announced. But the real pressure came from Labour's own grassroots. Constituency parties started passing motions calling for Starmer to clarify his position. Union leaders who had backed Starmer's leadership bid demanded private meetings to express their concerns. The GMB union, which represents many working-class voters, issued a statement saying they were deeply concerned about any moves that could undermine the referendum result. Unite, Britain's biggest union, was more direct. Their general secretary said publicly that Labour needed to remember who our voters are and what they voted for. Even Starmer's own shadow cabinet started showing cracks. Angela Rayner, his deputy, gave an interview emphasising Labour's commitment to respecting the referendum result. The careful wording was seen as a subtle criticism of recent party messaging. Wes Streeting, the shadow health secretary and a Starmer ally, was more direct. He told BBC Radio that any suggestion Labour wants to reverse Brexit is completely wrong. But the damage was done. In modern politics, perception matters more than reality. Brexit voters had been burned before. In 2017, they voted for a Conservative party that promised a clean Brexit. Instead, they got Theresa May's deal, which many felt was too close to EU membership. In 2019, they rejected Labour partly because of Jeremy Corbyn's promise to hold another referendum. They wanted Brexit settled, not relitigated. Now, seeing Labour talk about closer EU cooperation, even limited cooperation, felt like history repeating itself. Once again, political elites were trying to reverse their democratic choice through the back door. The psychology of betrayal runs deep in British politics. Voters who feel lied to don't just switch parties. They often stop voting altogether or turn to protest movements like Reform UK. Starmer's team seemed to misunderstand this completely. They thought they could manage the Brexit issue with careful language and technical details. But Brexit was never really about technical details. It was about sovereignty, control and respect for working class voters who felt ignored by the political establishment. When those voters saw Labour inching back toward Brussels, they didn't see pragmatic cooperation. They saw another betrayal by another politician who had promised them something different. The no confidence vote became inevitable once three things happened in quick succession. First, a second leak revealed that Starmer's team had been in informal talks with EU officials about the cooperation agenda. The meetings were routine diplomatic contacts, but the optics were terrible. Second, a poll showed Labour losing 8 points in Brexit-supporting seats while gaining only 2 points nationally. The electoral math was devastating. Labour could lose dozens of seats they needed to win power. Third, Reform UK announced they would stand candidates in all Labour-held seats where Brexit won by more than 55%. Farage called it Operation Red Wall, a direct challenge to Labour's heartland seats. Faced with this perfect storm, 27 Labour MPs decided they had to act. These weren't the usual rebels or troublemakers. They included former ministers, union-backed MPs and representatives of seats Labour had only recently won back from the Conservatives. Their calculation was simple: better to wound Starmer now than watch him lead the party to electoral disaster later. The no confidence vote itself was always going to be close. Labour MPs are traditionally loyal and many genuinely like Starmer personally. But loyalty has limits when political survival is at stake. MPs representing Brexit voting constituencies knew their voters were watching. Backing Starmer could mean losing their seats to Reform UK or the Conservatives. The vote took place on a Wednesday evening in Committee Room 14 of the House of Commons. The atmosphere was tense, almost funeral-like, as MPs filed in to decide their leader's fate. Starmer himself looked tired and strained. The past 3 weeks had clearly taken their toll. Gone was the confident lawyer who had rebuilt Labour's reputation for competence. In his place stood a man fighting for his political life. Because he was. The count was closer than anyone expected. 127 votes of confidence, 124 no confidence. With 3 abstentions, Starmer survived by just 3 votes. In normal times, that would be the end of the story. The leader faced down his critics and lived to fight another day. But these aren't normal times. A leader who wins a confidence vote by 3 votes isn't really a winner. He's a wounded animal and his opponents smell blood. Within hours of the vote, 3 more constituency chairs had resigned in protest. 2 shadow ministers gave interviews distancing themselves from any EU cooperation plans. Reform UK's Nigel Farage held another press conference, this time calling Starmer a dead man walking who has lost the confidence of his own party. The Conservatives immediately tabled a parliamentary motion calling for a general election, arguing that Labour was too divided to govern effectively if they won power. More damaging still, private polling commissioned by Labour's headquarters showed the party dropping 6 points in key marginal seats since the crisis began. The numbers were brutal. In seats Labour needed to win from the Conservatives, they were now trailing by an average of 4 points. In seats they already held but needed to defend, their lead had shrunk to just 2 points. Worst of all, Reform UK was now polling at 18% in former Labour heartlands, high enough to win seats under the first past the post system if Labour and Conservative support split evenly. Political scientists started talking about a potential reform breakthrough that could reshape British politics completely. Instead of the traditional 2-party system, Britain might end up with 3 major parties: Conservatives, Labour and Reform UK. For Starmer, the mathematics were terrifying. Even if he survived as leader, he might be leading Labour toward its worst election result since 1983. But stepping down wouldn't necessarily solve the problem either. Any new Labour leader would inherit the same fundamental challenge: how to appeal to both Brexit-supporting working-class voters and EU-supporting urban progressives. Angela Rayner, the most likely successor, had strong union backing but limited appeal to middle-class voters. Wes Streeting appealed to centrists but might struggle with Labour's left wing. Rachel Reeves had economic credibility but had never faced a leadership campaign. None of them had obvious answers to the Brexit question that had just destroyed Starmer's authority. Meanwhile, the Conservative Party was starting to recover from its own problems. Rishi Sunak's economic policies were showing results, with inflation falling and growth returning. Labour's crisis gave them breathing room to consolidate their position. Reform UK, sensing opportunity, started recruiting high-profile candidates for target seats. They announced plans to spend £10 million on the next election campaign. Serious money that could buy serious influence. The media narrative was shifting too. Instead of stories about Conservative chaos and Labour competence, headlines now focused on Labour division and Starmer's weakness. Within 48 hours of surviving the confidence vote, Starmer's approval ratings had fallen 12 points. More importantly, Labour's lead in voting intention had shrunk from 8 points to just 3, within the margin of error. Political betting markets started shortening the odds on a Conservative victory at the next election. Money talks in politics, and the money was saying Starmer's crisis might hand power back to his opponents. The real tragedy for Labour was that none of this needed to happen. If Starmer had simply stuck to his original promise to move on from Brexit, he would probably be cruising toward electoral victory. The Conservatives were weak, the economy was struggling, and voters were ready for change. Instead, by trying to be clever about EU cooperation, he opened up old wounds that had taken years to heal. The lesson is brutal but simple. In British politics, Brexit remains toxic for any party that looks like it's trying to reverse the referendum result. Voters might be frustrated with how Brexit turned out. They might even regret their choice privately, but they will punish any politician who treats their democratic decision with disrespect.